So last Monday, Hasbro announced the release of a retro collection wave of figures based on the Mandalorian TV series. And I have some thoughts on this, so stay tuned.
Come with me, toy fans.
Hey toy fans, I'm Tony from Analog Toys, and the announcement that came from Hasbro about the retro collection wave of Mandalorian figures was announced last Monday on what they now call Mando Monday. I thought this was quite funny because we're all aware of Force Friday. Mando Friday doesn't really make sense, even though the episodes are released every Friday, so I thought that was a little bit backward. Now in this new retro collection wave, we have the Mandalorian himself, we have the Child, IG-11, Queel, Moff Gideon, Cara Dune, and Greef Karga. And another figure that sort of comes packed in with another damn board game, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. The Mandalorian figure does look quite good. I like the paint applications, and his sniper rifle accessory is very nicely done, I believe. And I also like the Child action figure. I particularly like the fact that it comes with the pram, and the pram is set up on a little stand. Now Moff Gideon and Greef Karga both look acceptable, but they also come with capes that are very, very similar to Darth Vader's. And this is now another repro accessory that has been introduced into the collecting community by Hasbro. Now you would think this would upset the anti-repro crowd because, you know, repro is bad. Unless of course it's licensed repro, then it's okay. The IG-11 figure is quite adequate, however, Cara Dune and Queel are letdowns for me. Cara Dune has a face that just looks like a female Lego figure, and Queel just appears far too simple in his sculpting and his paint applications. I know this is a retro collection figure, but he looks far too simple. And I also really don't like the paint scheme that they've used on this figure. I mean, it makes Queel look like he's an employee of John Deere. With the two previous retro collection waves from Hasbro, we got 6 general release figures with the Star Wars wave, plus an additional figure of Grand Moff Tarkin, who came with the board game, and then the same with the Empire Strikes Back wave. Well, what makes this slightly different is we get 7 general release figures and a figure packed in with the board game. And the figure that comes with, of all things, a Monopoly game is the Remnant Stormtrooper. Now, this is a reversal of the 2 previous retro collection waves where we got 6 reproduced figures and then 1 never before released character. Well, in this here, we're getting 7 never before released characters, and the 1 character we've had before, albeit without the smudge, you know, and the dirt on him, is the Stormtrooper. It's also the 1 figure that people want to army build, and Hasbro have packed it in with a Monopoly board game. What the F, Hasbro? So where all the other figures are $19.99 at retail, to get the Remnant Stormtrooper you've got to pay $49.99 for a Monopoly board game. And if you do want to army build it, I mean, no one really needs more than 1 Monopoly set. And Hasbro, just, geez, think about the environment. Think about your customers. The fact that Hasbro have given us the only army builder figure in the set packed in with a Monopoly board game is just a complete kick in the nuts, and they are trying to rip us off and get as much money out of us as possible. Now, I have 2 other issues with this release of figures, and the first of which is based upon the sculpting. The early Star Wars figures from 1978, 1979 were quite simplistic looking. You know, they kind of resembled the real characters, but over the course of the next few years, with the introduction of The Empire Strikes Back and then Return of the Jedi, the figures improved somewhat. I mean, just look at the original Farm Boy Luke compared to Jedi Luke. The sculpting on this figure is far more superior. Unfortunately, I think the Mandalorian figures in this set look more like the very, very early figures. And when you look at the timeline, the Mandalorian is based after Return of the Jedi. Shouldn't their sculpting be somewhat more similar to Return of the Jedi style figures than they are the figures from A New Hope? For me, I'm just not sure why Hasbro chose to make retro collection figures for the Mandalorian. You haven't really finished your original retro collection set. We've had no Return of the Jedi figures so far. You haven't brought out any of the additional characters from Star Wars or from The Empire Strikes Back. I mean, everyone is screaming out for decent VAC metallized reproductions of C-3PO and R2-D2, but Hasbro isn't bringing out anything like that. I really enjoyed the additions of Grand Moff Tarkin and Snowspeeder Luke into the retro collection line. Because for me, the Kenner style of figures were based around the first 3 movies. And I believe that Hasbro, if you're going to reproduce figures from that line, that's perfectly fine. And if you're going to introduce new action figures, they should be action figures that also lived within those 3 movies, which is why Grand Moff Tarkin and X-Wing Luke, I think, were excellent choices. But now we've completely skipped over Return of the Jedi, and you're providing figures that didn't come from a property that was released back in the day, you know, that era that we are nostalgic for. I don't collect figures from The Mandalorian, I don't collect figures from the prequels, and I certainly don't collect figures from the absolutely rubbish sequel trilogy movies. I don't understand why Hasbro isn't producing things like Han in Stormtrooper disguise or R3-Y2, you know, the kinds of figures that we are getting from Stan Solo. But in a way, I'm also grateful that they aren't, because I would much rather support a company like Stan Solo than a company like Hasbro, because Stan Solo actually cares about its customers. You know what this retro collection really reminds me of? Is when Volkswagen decided to re-release the Beetle.
You know you forgot to take your mask off, right?
They took a classic retro car, they tried to make a modern interpretation of it, and it just completely backfired. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. I don't believe that Hasbro have made bad figures. These figures look adequate enough. I am disappointed with Quill, and he's one of my sort of favourite characters, and he's a little bit simplistic looking. That is a bit disappointing. I just feel that a new release of 8 retro collection figures could have been far better used, providing people with reproductions of Return of the Jedi figures or other unreleased characters from the original trilogy movies, as opposed to taking a modern day interpretation of Star Wars and trying to shoehorn it back into our nostalgia from the early 80s. Hasbro are obviously doing this because at the moment The Mandalorian is the only decent Star Wars anything that we've got out there, the only decent new Star Wars stuff that's coming out. But their decisions here are based around trying to get the most money out of the consumer rather than actually providing the consumer with what they really want. And after the debacles of the G.I. Joe retro collection line and all the exclusive figures in this wave or in this line getting packed in with board games that no one wants, I think there's only one thing left that we as collectors should be doing with Hasbro. So thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to check out our previous review of some of the Stan Solo droid figures, you can click right here. Or to check out our comments about the debacle that is the G.I. Joe Retro Collection line, you can click right here. I'm Tony from Analog Toys. Thank you all for watching. I have spoken.